Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episodes 111 and 112 of Steven Universe, Three Gems and a Baby, and Steven's Dream. Now, of course, let's talk about the odd-numbered episode first, and in the case of Three Gems and a Baby, this is a flashback episode. Although, it's kind of different from what we normally see with flashback episodes. Case in point, the framing device for the episode is that Greg is staying with the gems in the middle of a blizzard because, well, his van doesn't have heating. And as such, while Steven, Greg, and the gems are just kind of sitting around minding their own business and just kind of warming up by a fire, they begin reminiscing about how apparently they've dealt with a blizzard like this before, although the conversation gets started because Steven talks about how he's never seen a blizzard like this, and they reminisce how when Steven was a baby, he kind of sort of did deal with this, and recollecting that event does cause the gems to get somewhat embarrassed. As such, Steven managed to coax Greg and the gems to tell him the story, and from there, that's when the actual story. That's when the actual plot of the episode begins. And of course, we get our obligatory opening song where Greg does a song because of course that's how he has to begin every flashback story. And basically the song I think is called I Don't Think I'm Ready for This, although don't quote me on that. Basically, the song is about Greg as he's dealing with being a new single father since, as we've established, in order for Steven to even exist, Rose had to give her physical form in order to pass along her gem. So he's just kind of doing his own thing, trying to get through it all, but is also trying to deal with the loss of Rose, which, yeah, you do kind of see that in some subtle ways because, well, for the story, Greg is actually staying at Vidalia's house as she was out of town seeing family, and since it's in the middle of a blizzard, she decided to let Greg kind of stay at her house, tend to it, and take care of Steven there. And as Greg is, and of course that's where the episode, and of course it's in Vidalia's house that the flashback segment begins, and as Greg is just running around getting Steven's baby stuff ready, getting him a warm bottle and so on, as he sits down on a sofa to try and, get a moment of calm, well, he sees a picture of Vidalia as she's hugging both Yellowtail and a young sour cream, and just kind of seeing a picture of a happy family does kind of cause Greg to sadden a little. However, Greg doesn't get to mope very often, as he ends up getting a knock at the door, and sure enough, the ones that are there are the gems who come bearing gifts for baby Rose. Which, yeah, you have to kind of remember that the concept of basically Steven as a whole was foreign to the gems, because from their perspective they still see him as Rose, or at the very least Amethyst does. The other gems are kind of dealing with her in their own way, but they all have different viewpoints, and put simply, it's clear they don't really know how to handle Steven as a baby. And that's showcased with their gifts, as after Greg invites them in and wants to see what gifts they bring, well, they're not really gifts suitable for a kid, as Garnet comes bearing a razor, which, well, Steven won't be using for many, many years. Amethyst brings diapers, specifically adult diapers, which, yes, Steven can't use, while Pearl, who is apathetic to this whole thing, has just brought a dictionary because, hey, it's good for anybody who's just learning how to speak. So, yeah, they really have no idea what they're doing. Although in the case of Pearl, I think it's more ambivalence than anything, because it's clear that Rose's disappearance, so to speak, is hitting her the hardest, as she looks mopey, she seems angry, she's very strained, and she just cuts through any pleasantries. As Greg tries talking with her, she doesn't make eye contact, she doesn't say anything to him beyond what she has to. There's just no form of heart or care or anything in what she says. It's just, I don't want to be here, just take the gift, I want to get out of here, and I'm only here because they are here too. So, yeah, it's clear that Pearl is kind of not dealing with things very well. But either way, yeah, after Greg opens up the age-inappropriate gifts for Steven, he does thank the gems for them, but once again points out they're not really good gifts for a baby, and even talks about how what Steven's mostly into these days is, well, his shaking keys, as Greg pulls out a keychain and shakes it up, which of course gets little baby Steven all happy and excited, as babies are wont to do. But this also causes something, as, well, while Steven's just been kind of rolling around, it turns out that, because as a baby he's wearing a onesie, he wound up unbuttoning the onesie so his gem could breathe, and while Greg tried to keep buttoning it up, he kept unbuttoning it, so Greg kind of came to a compromise and buttoned up most of it, but left the part that had Steven's gem open, and basically, as Steven is getting all happy with Greg shaking his keys, the gem begins glowing, which everybody sees. Greg, of course, is freaking out because he has absolutely no idea what the hell is going on, or what's going to happen, or if this is something dangerous. But the gems each have their own individual answers, as they all believe that this is Rose trying to speak to them in some form or another. For Amethyst, she thinks that Steven is just Rose, but shapeshifted into a baby, and that glow is her trying to shapeshift back into her normal form. Garnet thinks that that's not the case, that Steven is actually a fusion of Rose and whatever parts came from Greg, and that maybe she's trying to unfuse, which I really don't want to know how that would work with a human baby, so I'm just going to not think about it. While Pearl thinks that the gemstone itself is Rose, and that she's trying to reform, but she can't because she has a baby around her. So basically they all have different answers, but none of them really know what they're doing. Greg, in the meanwhile, is just having a freak out because this is all unfamiliar territory as both a human and a father. So basically he just tells the gems to sit tight while he goes into another room and tries to get one of Vidalia's baby carrying books. Although when he comes back with said book, he finds the house mysteriously vacant, as the gems and Steven are gone and the front door is wide open. Yeah, they just straight up kidnapped him. They just grabbed the kid, stole Greg's van, and drove off, with Greg running off after them to try and catch them. Which, yeah, that's nice. Basically, while Greg does try chasing after the gems, he's trying to go after them in a blizzard. That's easier. Basically, catching them is easier said than done. And while Greg does try and work around trying to catch up to his van by asking a couple kids if he can borrow their sled and their dog to try and pull it along, that ends up going south too, as the dog just ends up barking at him and chases him. So, that's fun. But in the meanwhile, the gems are back with the gems in Greg's van. They're trying to each test their own theories and see if they're right. As Amethyst tries coaxing Steven into shapeshifting back into Rose, but her attempts at showcasing shapeshifting only just seem to amuse the kid, and Amethyst starts getting frustrated because, well, this doesn't make sense to her. She should be shapeshifting, right? Of course. But Garnet once again says, no, it's just fusion. He's not shapeshifting, he just needs to unfuse. And so Garnet tries coaxing Steven into unfusing, saying, look, I know you don't want to unfuse in front of Greg. He's a part of you, and that would be rude, but he's not here right now. It's just us. You can let go for a bit. Here, I'll let go too. And sure enough, Garnet hands Steven to Amethyst and unfuses back into Ruby and Sapphire. Unfortunately, because Steven is still a freaking baby, all he really responds with seeing Garnet unfused back in Ruby and Sapphire is freaking out because Big Square Mom has disappeared and two short strangers appeared, so he just starts crying, which immediately gets Ruby and Sapphire concerned, and they quickly fuse back into Garnet, Garnet starts having her own existential crisis because, well, if Steven was Rose, he should know Ruby and Sapphire, yet he doesn't know, yet he's acting like they're complete strangers. She doesn't understand. As such, Pearl, who's been driving the van this whole time, finally just has her fill and parks the van on the side of the road and decides that she knows what's right. As she once again asserts that the gem is actually Rose and that she can't reform because she has a baby around her. So Pearl decides to do something that even at this point in time I thought was kind of nuts. She wants to try and pull out the gem. She reaches for it. She starts talking about how Pearl starts talking about how she can let Rose out, how they can be together. And the instant that she grabs Rose's gem, Steven just starts happily giggling, which causes Pearl to just kind of convulse back and starting to tear up because, well, she can't do it. She can't do this. Rose wanted this kid so bad. She wanted it very desperately. Pearl may not understand why, but she wants to try and at least listen to it. But again, it's clear that she's still having trouble comprehending it because, well, apparently Rose's logic with having a kid is because, well, she wanted a gem who could grow and change, which I'll kind of go back to when I get to the end of these vlogs and talk about character stuff. But yeah, basically she says, basically for Rose, it's like, isn't it amazing how everything has to grow and change to move on, everything has to grow and change, and for humans it comes all natural, before Pearl just yells out, well, it's not natural for us. us, and yeah, you can kind of tell that the part of the reason why the gems were pushing each of their pushing each of their ideas so hard, is because they all miss Rose as well, and they thought that this was their way of trying to get Rose back. But ultimately, they have to kind of they start kind of coming to realize Rose isn't coming back. And Garnet asserts that yes, like yeah, it may be hard for them to change, but it won't be hard for Steven to change. And while Amethyst asks, "Well, what about Rose?" Garnet just says, "This isn't about Rose. From now on, it has to be about him." Which yeah, there's a somber mood from there on, but that kind of gets broken too as the gems hear Greg running up to the van as the dog is chasing him, and they let him inside. While apparently leaving the dog out in the snow, which I understand the dog is barking at him, but if you leave that dog in the snow, I will find you. But put simply, yeah, Greg wants to know what the hell is going on, wants to know why the hell they would kidnap his kid, and the gems just apologize and say there wasn't really a big plan, they just had a bunch of little ideas that never really came together. But yeah, Greg also admits that he also has no idea what he's doing because, well, Steven's not like any other baby. He's half gem and he does things that babies don't normally do. These things are going to be weird for him. It's going to be uncharted territory for all of them, but maybe they can at least try navigating it together, which I think is kind of nice. And basically, the episode ends as we cut back to the present day, and as everybody's just chilling, Pearl gets a kettle of tea off the stove, and Steven remarks how they were wrong about everything. And while the Gems and Greg all just kind of are embarrassed because yeah, they really did not know what they were doing, Steven admits that that's not what he was talking about. He says that they were wrong about not being able to change because they have changed. The people they are now are not the same people they were in that flashback, or hell, even at the beginning of the series. They have grown, they have changed, and yeah, they may all miss Rose still, but Steven thinks that Rose would be happy to see them all together and happy like this, which is a nice little thing to end on before we get a nice little comedic bit where Pearl talks about how she apparently assaulted Steven's babysitter once, so that was nice. But anyway, that's one episode done with. Let's talk about Steven's dream. And I did promise last week that we would be talking about a plot important episode. And oh me oh my, have we got one. As the episode actually opens with Steven having I don't want to say peculiar dream, because in the dream he imagines, I want to say, a great grass plain with maybe like a little mountain in the background, and he sees a pink rose. And he just sees a pink rose. He looks at it, and in the background he can hear his dad calling to him before he gets woken up. He gets woken up. Basically, what's really going on is that Steven is hanging out with his dad, and they were watching a movie, and Steven had fallen asleep. And when he woke up, and Greg, well, he was at first willing to just let Steven lie there because he thought he was so cute lying there. Well, he started seeing that Steven was crying. And he began getting worried, so that's when he roused his son awake. Steven says it's fine, he's not really sad, and he was just having a weird dream, but the dream itself wasn't even sad either. So he really has no idea what the heck's going. So he really has no idea what's going on, but he thinks he's fine overall. And so Greg thinks, oh sure, okay. And so Greg thinks that maybe he should just get Steven home. Although when Greg drops Steven back off at the temple, Steven asks Greg if Rose had ever talked about Pink Diamond, and Greg admits that Rose really didn't talk about stuff like that. Like, they talked about a lot of other important stuff, their hobbies, their interests, in some cases their fears, but basically, Greg usually was the one to let sleeping dogs lie, so to speak. As put simply, he felt that the past was the past. That he wasn't concerned with who Rose was, just who she is, or was as a person at that time. And basically the person that Greg knew was a kind, loving, and caring person. And that's all that Greg really needed to know. And yeah, he could always sense that Rose felt like she had to confess everything to him, but he never pushed it because he wanted her to feel comfortable. But you know what? That thought does make Steven smile, especially since he is reassured about who his mother was as a person before he goes back into his house, changes into his PJs, and then jumps into bed. Although when he goes back to bed, he begins having the same dream again, only now he's able to look around more. And as such, as Steven begins surveying his environment, one particular thing catches his interest. So, remember back in the Buddy's book episode when Steven and Connie were looking through Buddy's journal, and inside were a bunch of diagrams and sketches about all these various gem locations across the Earth? Well, remember how Steven mentioned that he missed that there was one there that they hadn't seen before? This weird palace thing, which I might have mentioned by name, but for the love of me, I can't remember unless I go back and watch the video. So apologies if I already mentioned the name in that vlog and I'm re-mentioning it here. But pretty much, Steven is able to see this weird palace-like structure, and it's in ruin, and now we can see it in color. It's basically just large, pink, and it's clearly been there a while as roses are starting to grow all over it. But as Steven gets a good look at this thing, he gets woken up again, and just like back in Greg's van, he's crying. So he now wants to know what the heck's going on. As such, the next day he calls Connie over and tells her about his dream, and sure enough, Connie actually thinks she might have an answer as she brings along Buddy's book and once again points to the diagram of that palace structure, which we learn in the episode is called a palanquin. As such, Steven begins to wonder if this thing has anything to do with his mom or Pink Diamond, and so once the gems arrive back from a mission, presumably, Steven runs up to them and shows them the journal and wants to know anything about the palanquin. And the gems, well, they have their own individual answers to it. So Amethyst has absolutely no idea what it is and admits she's never seen it before in her life. Pearl tries to talk about it, or Pearl tries to see what it is, but when she realizes what the palanquin is, she starts clamming up and starts saying, well, it looks like it's a drawing in a book. And the more Steven tries goading her on, saying, oh, come on, I know this has something to do with Mom. It has something to do with Pink Diamond, too. Pearl just starts getting nervous and weird. She starts getting nervous and starts clamming up before Garnet just freaks out and says, you can't go there! Which confuses Steven profusely. Then when Steven starts asking why not, immediately things go quiet. At which point Steven gets disappointed because he thought that the gems are going to tell him everything from now on. But as he keeps asking more questions, well, Garnet and Pearl aren't answering. In fact, Pearl just covers her mouth and just kind of looks away from Steven as she looks kind of ashamed, while Garnet just keeps kind of starts freaking out, saying, Steven, please stop. You're freaking out Pearl, which, yeah, Steven this doesn't really appease Steven. In fact, it just gets him even angrier because he just keeps asking more and more, but they keep denying him questions. Which, funny thing, Amethyst in the meantime is just watching all this with a bag of popcorn, which I kind of find amusing, that she's just, like, sitting back and watching the carnage because she has absolutely no idea what's going on. But either way, yeah, Garnet keeps adamantly saying they're not going to go there. They're never going to go there, and Steven just keeps getting more and more angry because he wants answers that are being constantly denied him. Until Garnet finally just says, Steven, stop. Rose wouldn't have wanted you to go there. Or Steven just yells out, Rose wanted, what about I want? She's my mom. Don't I deserve to know this? I'm sick of everyone lying to me. I deserve to know the truth. And Connie sees all this and apologizes for even bringing the book, but Steven kind of snaps at her and says, no, I'm glad you brought it because I'm glad I can finally get information that I don't need to get from them. Before he points to the gems, asks Connie if he can borrow the book for a bit, and Connie says yes, though she does want it back within a week because that's when it's due. As such, Steven ends up storming out of the room, and he storms out of the house. Well, at first Connie tries going after him, Garnet stops her and goes after and decides to follow Steven instead. As such, Steven and Garnet end up meeting outside, and Garnet just at this point is no longer being forceful. At this point, she's now just pleading, and and Steven is just kind of sitting on the steps outside of his house, and Garnet's just pleading, please don't go, please, I'm begging you, if you can't go. But Steven's just not listening, and the more Garnet tries goading him to not go, the more he wants to, especially with Garnet unintentionally revealing details about how if Steven goes there, she won't be able to protect him, and Steven's like, from what? And she freaks out, and she says that if I tell you why you shouldn't go, you'll just want to go more, which just makes Steven want to go more. And when Steven starts asking more about why Garnet can't protect him, she just says, I'm scared of her, which Steven says, her, you do know something, and Garnet just freaks out and says, no, I made it more interesting. At which point, Garnet finally just breaks down and even takes off her glasses, and she just looks so sad. And I love the look in her eyes. She just looks so scared and pleading as she just looks at Steven and says, please don't go for me. And Steven lets her know he is going. And Garnet just kind of sighs in defeat as she realizes she can't stop him. As such, Steven ends up running off and he goes to meet up with his dad because, well, the gems aren't going to take him there. Maybe his dad will. And so he explains the situation to him, how there's something gem related going on and he wants to find the Palanquin, which apparently is in Korea, which again makes sense since in this continuity that wars don't exist. So of course North and South Korea wouldn't be separated. But put simply, Steven wants his dad to take him there, and Greg, while he knows it's not usually involved with gem stuff, he sees that this is something his son really wants to do, so he says he can do it, and he knows someone that can easily bring the pair to Korea. And sure enough, it turns out that the person is Andy, who is happy to bring his cousins along because, well, family helps family. And while Steven thinks that when they get there they need to be all business, well, Greg does say that maybe they could do some minor sightseeing. Which I do kind of like that Steven concedes to that. We get a quick little montage of the universes as they are just popping around Korea, seeing the sights, getting food, trying on outfits, meeting the populace, and we get a nice little meta scene as they're walking through an office, and we see someone animating Greg. So, yeah, in the instant Greg sees it, he just ushers Steven out of the room. But basically, after the montage, Greg and Steven do end up managing to find where the Palanquin is, and of course, it's on on the side of a mountain, so to speak. As such, they end up traveling up the mountain, and they are showcased, and it's shown that they are getting close. As the more they go up the mountain, the more Steven starts crying, even though he's not sad. And upon reaching a certain point, they end up finding a fence very similar to the fence that the gems had around the temple before they met Greg. So Steven and Greg end up jumping it, and sure, as they continue exploring, they seemingly find the Palanquin. Only it looks a little different from how Steven remembered it from his dream, as instead of being decrepit, broken, pink, and covered in flowers, this one is pristine, new, standing upright, and blue. As such, while Steven is happy that they found the Palanquin, he's a little confused why it looks different. And sure enough, they soon get their answer, as they end up overhearing something, as what sounds like a person crying or mourning. And so Steven and Greg go to see what it is and hide behind some bushes, and they soon see who's there with them, as they see a large figure in a cloak standing before the pink, decrepit Palanquin from Steven's dream, as this figure is mourning and crying about a loss. And standing next to them is a pearl. A light blue pearl. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time that I tell you that this is the first present-day appearance of Blue Diamond. Which, I'll talk about my thoughts on her when I get to my thoughts on the episode, but yeah, the instant Steven sees her, he just freaks out and just ducks behind the bushes more because he quickly realizes why the dreams have been focusing on this area. Because he's been seeing through her eyes. It's part of the reason why she's crying. He's crying her tears. And so, the instant Steven sees her, he starts kind of having a little minor freak out, but unfortunately he doesn't really have a lot of chances to act on it, as it turns out that Blue Pearl, well, she overheard Steven having his little freak out and decided to go over to the hedge and decided to head over to the bushes to investigate. Steven, of course, is worried that they'll be found, but Greg says that he's got this, and so he decides to make himself known and pretends to just kind of be a local, which what I find amusing is that the instant Blue Pearl sees Greg, she just starts kind of cringing a little. But immediately Blue Diamond wants to know what the heck her Pearl has found, and Pearl mentions that she's found Greg, who immediately comes up and bows and greets Blue Pearl, or Blue Diamond, and even calling her her Majesty. And immediately Blue Diamond wants her Pearl to bring Greg over. And so Pearl and Greg, Blue Pearl and Greg go over to Blue Diamond, with Steven saying no, don't, but well, don't really have a choice here. And so, as they go over to Blue Diamond, Blue Diamond starts it's clear she begins just talking about Greg without talking to Greg. And she talks about how she's impressed how someone like him, how humans can survive so readily in the wild, how interesting and how unusual this planet is, that someone like him would live while someone as majestic as a diamond, as she points to the pink Palanquin, is dead. Which, yeah, it's clear that Palanquin belonged to Pink Diamond, as the blue one is clearly how Blue Diamond got here as well. If you remember the Answer episode, you saw that that was a thing that Blue Diamond was walking around in, which again I might have talked about in the Buddies book episode. I apologize if I did already, but I don't remember. I don't remember every little detail that goes in these vlogs. Some I remember clearly, some things I have to look back on. So again, apologies about that. But basically, Greg is able to figure out through the context clues that Blue Diamond is here mourning someone, and he begins asking, well, some somewhat personal questions. Nothing too probing, but just like general empathic questions, like, were you close to her? Blue says yes, now actually talking to Greg, and Greg starts talking about how he kind of understands her, what she's feeling. And Blue is actually a little surprised that he's able to understand. But yeah, Greg goes on to talk about how he lost someone too, and that he misses her every day. But how he talks about how he misses her every day, but he can't really do anything about it, and it's sometimes hard, but you kind of have to move on, and it's kind of it's difficult. And Blue realizes that this is what she's feeling. Greg does understand her, and as a result, she starts taking a liking to the good Mr. Universe as she starts realizing that maybe he doesn't deserve his fate, because part of the reason why she's on Earth is because, well, the cluster. Because basically, which I think kind of makes sense. The last the Diamonds ever heard of the cluster was that it was stable and getting ready to expand, to develop, to form, so to speak. And they have no idea that Steven and the Gems managed to bubble the whole thing beneath the Earth. So they're still under the impression that the cluster will still eventually emerge, and when it does, that it will destroy the Earth. But as a result of that, and so that's part of the reason why Blue is here, since Earth was where Pink Diamond was slain, and so she just wanted to come here one last time and say her final goodbyes. But she thinks that maybe Greg doesn't deserve to go out with the planet. And so as Greg just kind of was smiling and wondering what the heck she's talking about, Blue talks about how she's not supposed to really be here. She's glad she could, because she could at least save one last bit of Pink's legacy. Before she just picks up Greg and starts walking to her palanquin. And the instant Steven sees this, he begins freaking out. Well, he and Greg. As Greg immediately says, hey, put me down, please put me down, but Blue Diamond isn't listening, as she and her Pearl make her way over the palanquin, and Steven just jumps out of the bushes and chases after them, but sadly never gets a chance as they get into their palanquin, and, well, we soon see how Blue Diamond got to Earth, as from the cloud line around the mountain, we see a giant arm ship. It's Blue's color, and it kind of makes you wonder how anyone missed that. But then again, maybe it was hiding in very thick clouds, so I don't know. But either way, that flies over to the palanquin, and once Blue Diamond and her Pearl get inside it, it flies up into the hand and immediately just rights itself to start flying away from Earth. And while Steven tries to use his powers to jump out to the arm to try and stop it, well, he's too little too late, as the arm immediately warps away and disappears into the sky. Which the instant Steven sees that, he just falls to the earth and realizes his dad's gone. Although thankfully, before he can end up a stain on the mountainside, he ends up getting grabbed out of the air by Garnet, who immediately, just upon getting to the ground, just starts apologizing up and down to Steven because part of the reason why she didn't want to come is because in her future vision she saw that Blue Diamond was at the palanquin, and Garnet knew that if she was there with Steven, then Blue Diamond would have seen her, recognized her, and they all would have been captured. And so this freaked Garnet out something fierce, and so she knew that she couldn't go with Steven. But likewise, Steven begins apologizing himself because he's sorry he pushed it. He should have listened to Garnet because now his dad's been captured and they have no idea where he is. And so Steven immediately asks, well, what are we going to do? And so Garnet looks up to the sky fiercely but says, we're going to go to space and we're going to get your dad back, which is where the episode ends. So yeah. Okay, thoughts on both episodes. First, 3 gems and a baby. I think this one is a nice little... It's again another nice little character-focused episode. As part of the central theme of the episode is, well, kind of needing to deal with change and ultimately just kind of understanding and trying to get a grasp of what you don't understand. And we see that's focused on throughout the episode, as in the episode, regardless of whether the characters are aware of it or not, everybody is still kind of dealing with Rose's disappearance in their own way, shape, or form, as they're all kind of going with their own grief. Basically, in the way, well, let me just start from characters that we do know to the gems, or Greg to the gems. I feel like I'm messing this up, but whatever. Let's start with Greg first. In the case of Greg, we do see somewhat that it does miss Rose in the episode, as while he's taking care of Steven, he does see, like, he briefly sees a picture of Vidalia, Yellowtail, and Sour Cream, and just for a brief second, you can feel a sense of longing from seeing that, because, well, you can tell he wishes that Rose was there with him to cherish Steven like this. But unfortunately, by virtue of Steven needing to be there at all, Rose is not going to be there. And so, but he doesn't really have a lot of time to focus on that because, well, he's got a kid to take care of, and as such, most of his attention is instead making sure that Steven is happy, taken care of, content, so to speak. And basically, throughout the episode, you can see how he kind of deals with this new status quo in some rather scary ways, by which I mean he's freaking out, as he doesn't really no idea what he's doing. While he has a basic idea of what babies need, it's, even with a human baby, it's hard. It's not. There's no real rule book. You can have guidelines, and there are help books to say, well, look out for this, look out for that. But when it comes down, that's still always that's always just a crapshoot. You never really know what to expect from a baby. And when it comes to Steven, that's even more so true, because he's half gem, and thus he does things that Greg can't explain. And likewise, because of this, he has trouble trying to figure out how to take care of Steven, and thus when stuff happens that he's not prepared for, or not even more so not prepared for, like when Steven's gem glowed, he just starts immediately going, "Oh, what do I do? What do I do? Is this bad? Should I get something? Should I give him something else or whatever?" Basically, it's just clear that he's struggling to try and maintain some status quo, but he's trying his best, just at least for Steven's sake. He still clearly misses Rose, but at the very least, he's trying to honor her memory through Steven. And we can see that further in the episode, like when each of the gems come over with their presents, and they all really have trouble even calling Steven by name, which with Greg having to say, "You can call him Steven. It's what Rose and I like best." Just like, it's clear that in some small way, Steven is like Greg's memento of Rose. Yeah, she may be gone, but at the very least, he can still hold on to some memory of her with Steven. Yeah, it hurts, but at the very least, he's happy. Or at the very least, he's trying to be happy. He's trying to keep Steven safe, if not for his own sake, and when I say his own sake, I mean Greg's own sake, but at least for Rose's, which I like. I do like that. I do like how Greg kind of just starts trying to transfer his grief into being a parent, doing his best to try and be there for Steven, because he knows, well, his mom isn't going to be there. It's sad, but also pretty sweet. I like that. And in the case of the gems, well, we see how they're dealing with the loss of Rose too, because as Pearl pointed out in the episode, change is not something inherently natural to gems. And so now that so basically this person that they all held in such high regard, that they all loved and cared about, and who they all look up to in some way or another, well, she's gone now. She's just disappeared, and the gems, whether they're aware of it or not, are just trying to get her back. Like Greg, they try and form an attachment to Steven to try and kind of have something, to have some kind of proxy for Rose, but it's clear that really at this point in time, they just see Steven as Rose, but smaller. And while some of them do try and think of ways around it, like when Garnet says, "Well, no, Steven isn't Rose, Steven is a human baby," it's clear she doesn't fully believe that herself, because the instant that Gem starts showcasing anything that's Gem-related, she immediately is like, "No, actually, he's a fusion," which I can kind of understand why she would say he's a human baby, because if, by her logic, Rose fused with, I'm just gonna say it, Greg's semen, then that means that, yes, there is still a bit of human in there. But at the very least, it's still clear that that thought was reached, with the idea that Rose was still in there, and that she could come back whenever she wanted. But unfortunately, all the gems are wrong in that regard. And the more they try and push their ideals, the more they're proven wrong. Case in point, let's go with Amethyst, since she was the first one whose theory was disproven. As she was, as for Amethyst, Amethyst kept kept thinking that Steven was just a form that Rose took on, that she was just something that she could shift back into being Rose whenever she wanted, and that she was just being a baby for shits and giggles. But then, as she continues to see Steven and seeing how he acts, starts messing around, and so on and so forth, the more frustrated she starts getting, because this doesn't just mean that she's being proven wrong, but this also is showcasing that Rose is not there. And the more she starts to kind of comprehend that fact, the more she starts getting frustrated. It's like, no, you're Rose here. You can just change back whenever you want. So why don't you change back? Come on, come on. This is played out. Just go back to being who you were. It's clear that there is a bit of denial in there. And then of course we get to Garnet. Like I just said, she's under the, while she's one of the first gems that says that Steven's a human baby, she's also only doing this under the impression that Steven is a fusion of Rose and Greg and Greg. And so once she sees Steven start displaying gem power, she immediately thinks that this is an opportunity to get Rose back, saying, "Look, come on, just unfuse right now. Greg's not here. It's okay for you to unfuse. Come on, I'll even do it." And basically, when she ends up unfusing back into Ruby and Sapphire, and Steven begins just getting scared because the big square mob has been replaced by these two little shrimps that he has never met before. Garnet goes through her own freak out, because this again flies in the face of everything that she thought, because she quickly realizes that this isn't Rose, because Rose knows her. She knows Ruby, and she knows Ruby and Sapphire. So why is he scared? Why does he not like them? Why is he going nuts? And we start to see more of how Garnet's like, she just starts kind of having a little mini breakdown. She realizes, no, why don't you understand? Like, you know me, you know them. I don't understand. Why aren't you? How do you not know? How are you not like? How can you not know them? And then likewise we have Pearl, who, yeah, like I said, Pearl out of all three gems took Rose going the hardest, which makes sense considering Pearl's own feelings for Rose. But basically, her solution is just that, yes, Steven is a separate entity, but Rose is not. But Rose is still the gem, and that all they need to do to get Rose back is to take the gem out of Steven. And while it's not outright stated in the episode, I think it's made clear. I think it's made clear that Pearl does somewhat understand that Steven and Rose are not two separate. While Steven and Rose are not the same person, Rose is still a part of Steven, and that it's an integral part. Because based on how Pearl reacts when she doesn't take Rose's gem out of Steven's belly, she actually looks horrified with herself somewhat. Like, she realizes, holy shit, I almost killed this kid. Because, yeah, just kind of spoilers, taking the gem out of Steven is a bad idea. Because while Steven does have more organic, fleshy bits to him, he's still part gem. And as we see with most gems, the gemstone is the core of their being. It's what they are literally. It's, in a way, in a sense, the gemstones are who they are. And basically, if anything happens to the gemstone, it has an effect on them. If their physical forms are damaged, they retreat back into the gemstone. And likewise, if the gem gets shattered, that's basically the rough equivalent of death for a gem. So imagine with me, if you will, you have a kid who is half human, half gem. Some parts are more organic and fleshy and can get hurt and bleed and so forth, while the other half is magical and powered by this gemstone in his belly button. What happens when you take it out? What will happen? What will happen? I think a good analogy is this. It would be like if you had a building, but then just knocked out a whole section of support. It could stand for a while, but it will eventually topple over. And that's essentially what would happen if Steven lost his gem. It's still an integral part of who he is, and removing it is tantamount to removing a vital organ. He might be able to live for a little while without it, but eventually he won't. And I kind of like how we kind of see that with Pearl, because for a brief second, Pearl, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I had to stop something. But what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Pearl and how she almost took out Steven's gem. I might not get back to exactly where I was, but my point is this, Steve. What I do like about my point is this: I like that Pearl, just for a brief second, did almost want to sacrifice Steven for the sake of Rose, but then just her better nature kind of went out, and she realized, no, I can't do this. Do this, as she has to remind herself, this is this is exactly what Rose wanted, and yeah, she may miss Rose, but they can't just throw Steven aside for the sake of Rose, which I like how I do kind of like the real how that realization comes to each of the gems, that they have to that they don't let ultimately they kind of have to accept this whether they like it or not, and we see that reflected in them. Garnet ultimately quickly, as Garnet is the first to realize that they shouldn't that ultimately that Steven is his own being, and that regardless of how much they each miss Rose, he has to come first now. That they can't just try and focus on getting Rose back. They have to focus on what they have now. And like I said, whether they like that or not, Steven is here to stay, and they need to get to know him and put an effort into trying to help him out, because, well, he's what's left. And he's gonna have his whole life ahead of him. He's gonna have so many things to do, but he is going to need their help, which I like how they showcase that with the gems. They all still clearly want Rose back, and they're all still clearly saddened that she's not coming back, that they were all wrong, and that basically and that no matter what they do, Rose is never coming back. Then regardless of what they do, Steven is not just going to be is not just going to be a replacement Rose. By the end of the day, but ultimately when they what I kind of like is that they kind of confirm that, yeah, they had no idea what they were doing, but neither does Greg. But ultimately, they kind of work together to kind of figure it out together. They don't know anything about Steven. It's unfamiliar territory for everybody involved. For Greg, he's dealing with a half human, half gem baby, and for gems, they never were babies. So I kind of like how they showcase that. So likewise, it's essentially it's one of the first things that they kind of bond over, as they realize maybe, just maybe, they could help each other figure this out. So I do like that, and I do like that by the end, Steven reflects about how how they have changed so far, that the persons they were then are not the people they are now, and that ultimately, regardless of how they feel, Rose probably would be proud of them if she was still here. Proud to see how much progress they made, how much how much they've grown as people, and just it's a nice little sweet episode filled with some good humor and filled with some good humor, some good character stuff, and overall is just sweet. I like it, and it does make me smile. It has some slights. It again has the somber stuff with everybody missing Rose, and I do kind of like that we do see the aftermath of Rose disappearing. But on the whole, it's still a good. Overall, I do think it's a good episode, and it's just nice. So. But as for Steven's Dream, this one is very much it's another emotional roller coaster and packed together with plot. Case in point, in the case of the emotional roller coaster, we see Steven now trying to push more about trying to figure out what happened between his mom and Pink Diamond, which again, I know in retrospect, and again, we know the spoiler already, but I do like that we see Steven just trying to get more answers, and we see him trying to do that through small little ways. As when he starts dreaming of the Palanquin, he begins asking his dad, "Hey, did Mom ever talk about Pink Diamond?" And then likewise, when Greg just kind of gives him a non-answer, which he doesn't do maliciously, but he does say, "Look, that was in her past, and I never really pushed her about that." When Steven has further dreams, he begins looking for other sources, especially when the dreams become more prevalent. And likewise, when he goes to the gems and asks for questions, when they start doing the usual clamming up and saying, "Steven, just don't look into this," of course he starts getting more frustrated. And I do kind of like seeing that with Steven, because here's the thing, we don't see Steven freak out that much in the show. He's very much he's a cool and collected kid with moments with some bare emotional moments every now and then. And so likewise, it's nice to see him kind of have a freak out, so to speak, because it's nice to be reminded this kid does have his limits. He does have things that he really, really, really wants, but then likewise, if he's constantly getting a wall thrown in his face and he's constantly denied of course, I do like that we kind of see that come together, and it's nice to see him finally have outbursts to showcase that he isn't always happy-go-lucky Steven, who's always nice always nice and understanding about people. No, he does have his limits, and we've even seen that early in the series too, because Steven has that freakouts. Going back to the episode, going back to the Lars and the Cool Kids episode, when Lars kept blaming Steven for everything, Steven finally freaked out at him and pretty much told him to shut up and listen to him. And so, and well, we don't, but likewise, those freakouts are kind of few and far between. They're there every now and then, but they're not really prevalent. So it's kind of nice to see Steven having that freakout. But what I like here is how emotionally charged it is, because it's very much driven by everything that Steven has seen so far. As part of Steven's character arc through the show, he's constantly had his reality defied and changed. What he thought was the case he quickly learned was not what it was. And then likewise, as things continued escalating and growing, and he saw just how deep the rabbit hole went and just how twisted things really were behind the scenes, of course he would start wanting to know more answers. And the more people keep trying, and basically, it's like this. It's like he saw behind the curtain, but every time he tries to take another peek, someone smacks him aside and says, "Get back in your seat." Well, he's not having that. He's seen what's behind the curtain. He wants to know more. And the fact that people keep telling him, "No, you don't need to know more. You're good where you are," it of course frustrates him. It makes him angry. And I do kind of like seeing that when he confronts the gems about it, more specifically Garnet and Pearl. Amethyst is genuinely clueless. And likewise, when you see Garnet and Pearl have their own reactions to Steven's freakout, of course they start. Of course, it feels very much charged, because it's clear Garnet and Pearl in some way do want to tell Steven, but because of their own fears or because of their own fears or concerns, they keep it quiet. They don't say a thing. Pearl especially, because I'm just gonna point this out right now. I like that we see her with her hands over her mouth, which I'm not gonna say anything. Haley, if you're watching this, I'm not saying anything. Basically, I'm not going to say why, but I do like that little subtle bit of foreshadowing. As the instant the topic of Pink Diamond comes up, her hands cover her mouth, and throughout the rest of the scene of Steven yelling at them, they never leave. They're just always there. And basically, the one that does the lion's share of arguing is Garnet and Steven. So I like that little bit of showcasing there. But likewise, I do kind of like seeing Garnet losing it a bit, because we have seen her get a little. Of course, we've seen Garnet lose it as well. But likewise, to see her just suddenly fly off the handle the instant the Palanquin comes up, it makes you wonder what is there that is so scary that freaks her out. In case we learn it's Blue Diamond, yeah, that immediately is a freak out. That makes sense considering her own history with Blue Diamond. And so likewise, I do like that's a good bit of character stuff. But likewise, just as Garnet said, the more she tries to tell Steven why he shouldn't go, and the more he's interested in going. And likewise, it's a similar case with us. We want to know, what is so scary there? What is so scary about the Palanquin that she doesn't want Steven going there? And so, like Steven, we want answers. We want to go and check it out. And so, likewise, when Steven and Greg go there and we suddenly learn what was drawing Steven there in the first place, yeah, like Garnet, we kind of have a little freak out, because we could realize, oh shit, that's one of the bad guys. That's one of the big ones. One of the final bosses. One of the diamonds, I like how much of a contrast Blue Diamond is to Yellow. We don't really see a lot of her character here, as it's a brief meeting, but the presence still feels imposing, because in comparison to the gems, she is still large and grand. And likewise, while with Yellow Diamond you got someone who is very much studious, commanding, and in control, instead of sitting up straight and looking proud, she's slouched over and crying. Blue Diamond is just sad. She's just very much, and likewise, while Yellow Diamond has a very authoritative and commanding presence, Blue Diamond is very soft-spoken and emotional, and which I think is a nice little offset to Yellow Diamond, so to speak. Yellow Diamond did seem to very much strict and authoritative, and yes, even angry. But whereas Blue is more on the opposite end of the emotional spectrum in that regard, as she's more sad and soft-spoken. And while she still clearly has that high and mighty "I'm better than you" attitude, as showcased when Greg showed up, she just did not directly speak to him until he said something to her specifically. We still get a sense that her brand of authority is very much different from Yellow's, because in her case, it does feel like that she still somewhat listens. It's just that whereas Yellow Diamond just disregards everything you say, it's for Blue Diamond that she considers it, and then immediately just thinks, or just immediately goes, I guess it's like, interesting. It's it's more, and it's not really interesting in the sense of, oh, she listened to you, oh, she's understanding. No, 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 no. It's interesting that you even said that. That's really it. She doesn't care what you have to say. Just the fact that you said it, it intrigues her. And we see that with Greg, and likewise, we do still showcase that she still has that same diamond hoity. She still has that same diamond, I can do whatever I want attitude. As the instant she realizes that Greg has a kindred spirit to her, at least in mourning, she just takes him without even his consent. Like the instant she realizes, oh, maybe I shouldn't let this human die, without even listening to him, she just picks him up and walks away. And basically anything he has to say at that point just falls on deaf ears. So I do kind of like that's a good I do like that for first impression. It's a brief first impression, but it's enough to get a sense of her character. So I do like that. But likewise, in terms of plot, yeah, it's meeting a diamond again is still a big thing. And once again, I do, and likewise, while it doesn't really feed more into where things are going to go from here, as really the information we're fed with her is that's nothing new, as we know. Rose killed Pink Diamond, and she probably died here in Korea. At the very least, it just does jumpstart the next ongoing plot because, well, Greg has been kidnapped and brought to space, so now the gems have to go and get him. So it does draw you in, makes you want to see where things go and how exactly they're going to get him back. So, yeah, on the whole, it's a nice little beginning too. It's very packed with a lot of emotion, good mystery, and plenty of tension, and some nice humor there. Especially when Steven starts calling Garnet out for keeping everything in secret. Which I kind of like that. I love how it mixes the drama with the comedy there. Because as Steven is yelling at Garnet and Pearl, Amethyst is just on the sidelines, happily eating popcorn, which he tries to share with Connie. Or likewise, when Garnet tries to talk Steven out of going to Korea, she's just like, "If I told you, do you want to go more?" It's like, "This makes you want to go more." It's like, "I'm scared." It's like, "I can't protect you. Protect me from what?" It's like, "Come on, I just want to know." It's like, "I'm scared of her." Ah ha ha! It's like, "No, I made it more interesting." Like, I don't know why. That makes me giggle. But overall, Three Gems and a Baby is a nice, sweet episode that kind of that deals with the characters as they're dealing with the fallout of Rose's disappearance, while also trying to adjust to the new status quo, having Steven around and having to figure out how to properly take care of him, and likewise, Steven's dream is offers some nice mystery and tension while having a great payoff with the reveal of Pink Diamond and jumpstarting the next ongoing plot with having Greg being kidnapped. So, on the whole, I think both episodes are nice. One's emotional, one's full of mystery and great intention. So overall, good time overall. So good time. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I will hopefully see you next week as we see how the gems try and go after Pink Diamond to rescue their good Mr. Universe. Till then, hope you have a good day. Hopefully the sun is not shining too brightly on me. I did close a curtain, and I will hopefully see you next week. Take care.